let's just confirm we have a quorum. We have a quorum.
We do have a quorum.
All right. Then we'll move on to first item, November 16 meeting summary. Everyone had an opportunity to review the summary of the November 16. So do I hear a motion to approve as submitted?
So moved.
So second discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Carries unanimously. We'll move on to item 3. Approval of the September 22nd meeting or workshop summary. Everybody had an opportunity to review that. So I would entertain a motion to approve them as submitted.
So moved.
Motion and a second discussion on that. Call for the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. We move on to item 4. Update on TNC.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. For this update, I want to refer you to the memo that you received in your packet from CAC Chair Tom McGovern. Our CAC officers, I believe, are online as well this morning, so they'll be able to chime in and provide any feedback and answer any questions as well. I'm just going to briefly touch on some of the highlights of the CAC activities. And also the focus, as you know, is currently on delivering a short list of named projects. So for the RTA board consideration, as you may know, we were hoping to get that in December, but we'll be moving that date to January. So the next RTA board meeting is the end of January. So that's the goal of the CAC for right now. This task of getting a short list was, as you know, delivered through a TMC workshop that was conducted back in September, and also the CAC participated in 2 separate exercises, evaluation exercises. That the details of those exercises and how we came about with the list of 32 projects is also in the memo. The CAC is continuing to evaluate the list of projects, and they'll be continuing to rank. And on my next agenda item, I will explain a further refinement and some input that we received from the CAC for your consideration. That's my quick update on the CAC activities to date. I don't know if the officers have anything else to add.
Come on. What else?
I said it was going to be.
I don't see them on.
Okay.
Okay, questions on the CAC update? Anyone? Okay. So keep going then to the RTA next development plan. And then Rod's got some comments as well.
Yeah, before I hand it over to Rod for his ADOT update, again, in the memo, we have the description of the analysis and input of how the 32 projects that you received in your packet were developed. I will also go over the input from the CAC on potential changes to the RTA next list of the 32 named projects. Last month, as you know, the TMC members were asked to update their cost estimates by December 2nd. That information is still being updated, and we will be providing that to the CAC at their next meeting. So just to keep that in mind, that this is still an iterative process and we're still working on updating all of that information. So this week on December 19th, the CAC met and reviewed the short list of the 32 projects that you have in your packet, and they provided additional input. This is the input that I emailed all of you this morning and that we handed out here in the meeting this morning. This input is something that we would like your review and feedback on, and to let us know, what you feel about the CAC's input. I also wanted to stress that this information is not set in stone. We're still working through, nothing's been deleted or removed. We're still working through further adjustments and refinements. So please keep that in mind as we assemble the draft and the public feedback is considered. And also, Mr. Chair, I know in the past you've asked for next steps. So I just wanted to remind all of you, this is also in the memo, but the CAC meetings for January were moved out 1 week because of holidays. So their meetings will be on January 9th and January 23rd. So those are the next two meetings prior to the board meeting. And then I believe you all have a meeting on the 11th. And then the iterative process will continue during this time. So if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, if there's no other questions, I would like to go over the handout to explain how the CAC's input.
For the record, just show that Shane is on as Tom McGovern. Was on it. Is he still on?
Yes, he is.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning, Shane.
Good afternoon. Oh, sorry. Hey, Shane. Good morning. Go ahead,
Okay.
Bucky.
So the handout that you received this morning is input from the CAC on the potential changes needed to RTA next list of the named projects. And again, this is referring to the list of 32 projects that you all received in your packet. And keeping in mind, we use the same frame of mind that we did at the workshop, keeping in mind voter support. We talked about what's missing and what could be considered too controversial. So those are the two areas that were discussed on Monday. So in terms of what's missing, the input from the CAC that we received from the 32 projects is that perhaps adding projects in the Southeast and Vail area would be helpful. I listed 5 projects that were a possibility for consideration based on their input. So the first one was the Marianne Cleveland Way from Houghton Road to Tucson city limit. The second one was Marianne Cleveland Way from Vista del Lago to Colossal Cave Road. The third one was Colossal Cave Road number 1 from I-10 to Marianne Cleveland Way. The fourth one was Colossal Cave Road, Tucson city limit to Dawn Drive. And then the fifth one was Colossal Cave Road number 2, Marianne Cleveland Way to Camino Loma Alta. So again, these were projects in the Southeast Vail area that the CAC wanted to possibly add.
So these were suggestions from them.
This is suggestions from the CAC, correct? And this was based on also the geographical distribution and all of that. In terms of projects in the South area, one project that came to mind was the Houghton Road Andrada Polytech High School to Camino del Toro project. There were 3 projects that were suggested in the Northwest area, and that was the Thornydale Road, Cortero Road to Camino del Norte project, the Ina Road number 3, which is the I-10 to Camino de la Tierra project, and then the Ina Road, Cañada del Oro Wash to Paseo del Norte project. Those were the 3 in the Northwest area. And then the final suggestion for what's missing is the possibility of completing the corridor, the Drexel corridor, and perhaps adding Drexel Road from Cardinal Avenue to Mission Road to complete the Drexel corridor. So those are the what's missing projects. And I wanted to see if the TMC had any questions or concerns at this time.
Any thoughts on that? Go ahead, Shane. I see your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a quick question, Pocky. Are they suggesting that all these projects be added? Or are they suggesting that if we were to add a project in those areas that look sparse, these are the projects that they would suggest we pick from?
Yes, the latter. I think that when the CAC had this discussion, these are lists of projects that they're suggesting, but these are ones that were glaringly missing from the geographic distribution. So at this time, it wasn't determined whether they should all be added, but they were just saying that these are definitely projects in those areas that should be considered.
And did they rank these projects in their review? Are these in any kind of ranked order? Or I mean, I know that they put all the other projects through quite a quantitative venting, right? But I don't know vetting, but I don't know if they did anything here.
These were additional projects outside of the ranking. Again, once they looked at the geographic distribution, they looked at some additional projects that could be on there. So not all of these were ranked.
Hey, let me ask you a question. Hey, Tom, thanks for joining us. And if you have any further conversation about CAC in general, we can certainly open that back up. But with regard to the conversation leading up to that, to this list of what's missing, any commentary there, any thoughts? I understand the geographic distribution. Is there anything else that we should be paying attention to there?
No, one thing I might add, Mr. Chair, is that these additional projects, if you will, while they didn't fall in the initial cut of, $1.1 billion worth of projects, they're not far off of, that 32 or 35 project ranking. So it's not like we're, dipping into either projects that were not recommended by the TMC or even, way down the list. They're all in, relatively highly thought of projects. So it's about all I could add at this point. Besides, we've tried to get input where we can and did get a lot of input from the Southeast area, the Vail area, and Southeast Regional Council, et cetera, prior to one of our previous meetings. And these are all projects that are very popular with that group for sure as well.
Very good. Mary, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
I'm just muted.
Might be muted there. It doesn't look like you're muted, but you are.
How about now?
There we go.
Okay, change of venue. I think, thank you for noticing those this morning. I think I was probably one of the ones that made some of those suggestions in the meeting. And part of my reason for making those, besides the geographic locations, was my sitting with the TMC when we did that Saturday morning meeting where we went through all these projects. And I recall that the comments from the members of the TMC that were on the region, was Southeast region maybe and Southwest region, both the Drexel area and the Marianne Cleveland Way and Colossal Cave came up as important topics at that meeting as well. And so I brought it forth as something that the CAC really needs to kind of reconsider for those two reasons. Thank you.
Very good, Mary. Thanks.
Mike.
Go,
Go ahead.
Terry, and then.
Go ahead, no, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I guess to Tom or Mary, did the CAC begin to look at what they wanted to give up to accommodate these new programs?
Great question.
That is a great question. And Tom, help me on that, but I don't believe we did.
Actually, my question too.
Okay.
So
Okay, good.
Yeah, I think it was Shane's also. No, we didn't. We know that there's perhaps some imbalance, and there were some other questions that had to do with money that could also impact that kind of decision. So without those answers, as far as how far over our target total budget we might be at this time, it wasn't really possible to start cutting any projects, if you will.
Fair enough. Good, Bucket.
Mr. Chair, I was just going to say that the second part of the handout does discuss some projects that are controversial. So those are possibilities for removal. So that'll be the next section once we're done with this.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Terry.
So I just wanted to know, because I had the opportunity to listen in on the majority, although people kept coming into my office and interrupting me while I was trying to listen to the CAC meeting. I did catch quite a bit of it, and I was actually impressed and pleased with the amount of discussion that took place relative to looking at where the projects were distributed and also looking at what the main focus of the RTA next is, and that is to improve transportation, to reduce congestion and things of that nature. So I thought they actually did a great job. A number of people, it wasn't just one or two people that dominated the conversation. It was a lot of different people that were contributing and voicing concerns about how the projects were distributed. And I think they've done a good job here in not only not what I've seen on the sheet of paper, but what I heard on the meeting of really identifying those projects that are meaningful projects that are going to help the region as a whole. So, kudos to you, Tom, and to the entire committee. I thought it was really well done. And so, yeah, I just wanted to mention that. And I did not pick up in the conversation anything that said they wanted to eliminate this one or that one. But I think Pocky is absolutely right. There was some things that were brought up relative to these projects here, which I think could be ones that could be considered as ones that would be removed in order to make room for some of these others to distribute and also be more impactful relative to congestion, improve transportation.
Very good. In a minute, I'm going to take the privilege of the chair and reopen up the CAC conversation because you reminded me that we should probably talk about John Bernal is no longer our rep at the CAC. We should probably talk about that as a group. So we'll go back to that in a minute to maybe help you out a little bit on coverage there. But I think the point that you're making, if I'm understanding it, is the focus of the regional priorities of dealing with transportation on a macro scale first and foremost, and then I think the way that you had described it, Jan, when we first started this was let's do that, then we'll overlay the jurisdictional boundaries and other criteria, and I think that's where we are. So I'm glad to hear that. I was not privy to those conversations, so I'm glad that that was the spirit and intent of how that was approached. That's good. You want to go over the next piece of that?
Sure, Mr. Chair. So the second question that we asked the CAC is what could be considered as too controversial for regional support? And again, keeping the voters in mind. One of the things that was discussed, while no projects specifically were listed, the issue of improving congestion, as Terry mentioned. If we're not improving congestion, then we're missing the main objective of the performance of the regional system. So just to keep in mind if there are any projects that don't do that. The other one was the Sonoran corridor. The reason this one was brought up is because it's still a study and will probably be a study for a while. And it may not add value to the voter is what the CAC input was from the voter's perspective. The third possible controversial project was the 6th Avenue Ronstadt Transit Center to Tucson International Airport high capacity transit corridor. This is just due to concerns from South Tucson. And then finally, just a general observation is that there are too many projects that are clustered in one area. So again, going back to the geographic distribution, they'd like to see something for everyone approach.
Very good. So we'll start on this last one there first. I'm a little nervous about just the sprinkling based on something for everyone approach, just because I think that can really water down the spirit and intent of what we're trying to do. I understand it. I mean, I'm not saying we should do it. I'm just thinking we have to be careful of that as a goal. Related to that, I appreciate the resonating with the voter component because ultimately that's the goal, right? But I don't know that I would throw that into the mix really on. I think that's the subordinate piece as we are developing it. It will become the superior piece. But I'm a little nervous about trying to do that now as we go through this exercise. I think that, again, we stay focused on the goals of the regional approach and just ability on a macro scale. and then how that translates into this. That's just a thought. And it almost seems counter, but I don't think it is in terms of the linear approach of how we generate the projects and ultimately present. Anything to add to that, Tom or Mary? Oh, Shane, do you have your hand up from last time, or do you have another comment?
You certainly finish your thought, Mr. Chair. I did put my hand back up. I have a question about that second section. So when you're done with your question.
Yep, go for it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Pocky, Terry, Tom, and anybody that can weigh in. Mary, can you help me understand that first bullet? What's meant there? I mean, it's a sub bullet to the top, the lead bullet, which is perhaps remove. And then it says if we're not improving congestion, then we're missing the main objective of improving the performance of the regional system. What's being suggested there? Can you just clarify for me again? Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I'll start and then pass it on to anyone else. Maybe Terry, you can piggyback on that. It references to the performance measures in your portal. If you look at the projects, there's a performance measure criteria that identifies if the project is implemented, are we improving congestion? And kind of at a high level view of that portal, it shows that majority of projects that are on the list of 32 are basically not improving congestion per se. And Terry, you want to add to that? You were
Yeah,
listening.
I was just going to say, what I took from that and what I took from the conversations is that if there are projects listed in that top 32 that don't improve congestions, they should be removed. So that in essence is what I took from the conversation.
Yeah, I might add one other thing to that. The congestion question was kind of brought up as a result of seeing that existing congestion by the whatever metrics may have been used in the RMAP, which is I think where that data came from, indicate that nearly all the projects are green. That is, don't have significant congestion now. And so the whole question of congestion as a primary concern for our list of projects is, I guess, kind of confusing to some members of the CAC, and it would be helpful, I think, to hear from TMC as well. If we're showing most of these projects as not being congested now, then this trying to improve congestion becomes kind of a meaningless goal, I guess.
So the idea, the suggestion here is to take that out of the guideline as a guiding principle, so that it's not in conflict with the projects that are being put forward for consideration. Is that my understanding?
No, not entirely. We didn't get that far in talking about it, and I think part of that is because we kind of want to really understand what is the level of congestion now. How big of an issue is it among the jurisdictions? I know a lot of the individual projects are all about congestion. So, seeing the feedback on our in our database has probably just gotten a little bit of confusion going on. That wasn't an answer, was it?
Well, so most of the projects I'm gonna dig a little deeper, I guess, Tom. Thank you.
Please.
So most of the projects that have surfaced through the CAC process don't score very high. If I'm understanding you right, they don't score very high on the scale of reducing congestion in the region. So let me just stop there. Is that an accurate statement?
I think so. Maybe Josh can provide a little bit of color to that, color coding, if you will, of the congestion questions.
Great.
Thank you,
If I
Tom.
may, if I may just rephrase the question, it's not scoring is are we meeting that objective?
Right.
Using scoring, I think, would confuse the conversation. So if your question is, are we meeting the objective of improving congestion? The answer is no.
Go ahead, Josh.
To address, I guess, both issues on the scoring front, for the evaluation tool, we're really guided by the goals of the CAC, in which the main goal was reducing congestion through TDM and ITS. That is an additional layer to addressing congestion, or how you address congestion. So we looked at what the 2019 and 2045 congestion levels as modeled through the RMAP show for each of the projects in the list of 108. Through the different rankings, the priorities that were selected, the projects that were submitted by the jurisdictions, congestion doesn't really show up strongly in the majority of the projects in that list of 108. The refined list of 32, again, congestion isn't showing up as the poorest performing performance measure. Safety, it's all red. So where there are multiple goals that the CAC is looking to meet, the congestion one is not forefront across all of the projects, whereas other priorities are.
I'm not a technical street traffic individual, so I apologize for having a bit more of a thick head on this one.
Great. Bring it.
So thank you. So if I understood you correctly, as a region, we identified traffic mitigation as a guiding principle for us in developing a list of projects for the region. But none of the projects that we submitted, this isn't a CAC thing, it's none of the projects we submitted really address congestion very well. I mean, did I understand that correctly?
I wouldn't say none of the projects. I would say I don't have it in front of me, but that wasn't the main emphasis area on the projects. I would say the majority.
If I may.
And that congestion isn't one of the larger issues based that the network is underperforming in.
Mr. Chair, if I may just add some context, so Shane, for your benefit, comparing it to the current RTA plan that was passed in 2006, that was an emphasis for the 2006 plan. And the reason that was the emphasis, obviously, at the time was that we're behind the 8 ball. We were trying to improve and improve capacity and reduce congestion. So compared to that, obviously, trying to comply with the RTA's mission, obviously improving congestion is still on the table as a goal, as an objective. But as we discussed earlier, it appears that majority of projects that were submitted are not going to be meeting that objective.
Interesting.
I think if I could, there's just one other thing. This is a comment that was made by, a CAC member and may have had a few nodded heads, but it's not something that the CAC, voted on or achieved consensus about. This statement of, if we're not improving congestion, we're missing the main objective. And I don't think, but again, we didn't poll everyone or vote. I don't think that the main objective of most of the members of the committee and frankly the goals of our guiding principles were specifically congestion or bust, or fix the congestion, or consider it a failure. And the performance of the regional system goes beyond just the congestion metrics as well. So as Josh mentioned, all the red and the safety area is getting a lot of attention, I think.
So Mike, Mr. Chair, sorry. I do apologize about that, Mr. Chair. So congestion is not an issue in your community?
Who are you asking me?
Yeah.
Would beg to differ.
Yeah.
So let me,
Well, so I'm a little surprised. I mean, I really am. Most of the time when I've been a part of polling, you know, our citizenry, one of the first things they bring forward in terms of responses is they don't like sitting at stop signs and stoplights very long, and they don't like long queue lines and what have you. So congestion's always it's always a main factor, and it's very popular, you know, on the vote side when you say, hey, you vote yes on this and we're going to address congestion. So I'm a little surprised that as a region, and I'm there, I'm part of it, right? I'm just as a region, we submitted projects that largely don't address congestion problems. That's just a kind of an eye-opening fact that I'm realizing now. Thank you.
so, thanks, Shane. This is a healthy conversation, I think, to set the stage for at least making sure we're on the right track. The key words in that bullet point are the main objective of improving performance. So improving performance isn't necessarily addressing just congestion, it's all inclusive. And so as the regional system is the conversation about, and then list them, right? Congestion's one, safety and other ability pieces. You know, I'm a little surprised that the congestion isn't seen quantitatively, it sounds like, as an issue or a huge issue for us as a region. I'm a little surprised at that. And so I would ask for maybe a little clarification on that, Josh, as to why that would be. Is it current or projected?
You know, where we're looking at both, and this is also a relative metric, right? Like when we look in comparison to other regions, and we're using some of these national standards of looking at congestion, our region is not as dramatically impacted by it.
On that metric.
Right, but that doesn't mean that there isn't that impact felt, you know, personally when you're sitting at a stoplight for a little longer than you want, right? And so where that kind of comes into play, it's just overall across the performance, there are more poorly performing areas of our network than congestion. I guess kind of to Farhad's point, where the existing RTA really addressed a decent amount of capacity issues. That doesn't mean there aren't, and it doesn't mean that there aren't congestion-related projects in this list of 32, or actually this more expanded list as well. But that initial list of 32 had other priorities. And so, particularly as it's expanded, that's going to bring some more in, but it's not going to be all 35 projects or whatever comes out.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Dilly, this is when I speak so that you look like a really smart engineer. Because this is a very odd question, but I guess part of what I'm wrestling with are not named road projects simply one element of RTA. And I look at that and think, so would not this be the element that really focuses on congestion and roads? Because I just keep reminding myself that when we look at that we spend a whole lot of time talking about the main road projects, but this is one of the buckets of money, right? And so aren't some of those other elements dealing with some of the other kinds of technology, mobility pieces of the pie? And if this is the section that only talks of, that is to focus on road construction,
Thank you.
does it not then disproportionately potentially weigh in favor of things like congestion? Does that make sense.
Total sense, and I think.
Yeah.
Makes sense to me.
It makes total sense, Jen, and 100% on the same page with you, and I think with Shane. So a lot of confusion on my part when we start talking about, majority of the projects that are being submitted in the top 32 don't deal with congestion. If that's the case, then we need to relook at the top 32 and look at those that specifically address congestion. Because this is about improving people's ability to get from point A to point B, plain and simple. That's the bottom line of this portion of the pot of money. And that's what the focus should be on. There's a lot of noble ideals and thoughts and conversations that are going on in the CAC relative to, mass transit and bike lanes and trees and all that. I mean, those are all noble things, but that's not the purpose of this pot of money. So that's where the focus needs to be here. And I felt for quite a while that we were going off on a wrong way. And I was happy to see in the last CAC that a lot of people said, well, wait a minute, man, we're going to have a hard time getting the voters of this community to go, of this county to go, yes, so we want that, when it does almost nothing. I wouldn't say it does far less than it should to address congestion.
Okay, so, well stated between the two. Well done. Sorry. Oh, okay, go ahead, Carmine.
Morning, can you hear me?
He's gonna contradict.
Now the
everything
engineer,
you said.
don't contradict me, Carmine.
Go ahead, Carmine. We can hear you just fine.
You can hear me good. And just for the record, I'm not an engineer. I just play one on TV. So I appreciate the discussion and some of the detail behind the rankings. I'm trying to absorb all of the scoring, values that are on 108 projects. So if you look at the CAC scoring priorities that was sent out to us, it's really hard to get a relative view of how they line up to one another. And one thing that might be helpful, and I know it would be a very large graph, but if we had a bar graph that broke out the components of scoring for each of those projects so that you could see, a stackable bar graph for each project that shows the portion of the total score that was related to each goal. Because when I look at some of the scoring, and for example, on the list of CAC recommended maybe add projects, Thornydale Road is on there. And when I look at that scoring, overall, it scored as number 5 out of 108 projects, but it didn't make the list of 32.
Right.
And just to the point of congestion and safety, it got maximum points on both of those criteria. And I'm looking at others that scored 1s or 0s on the congestion scale, and those are on the list of 32. So being able to discern in a view, and I know it's going to be a long spreadsheet, or a long graph, being able to discern what the constituent scoring components of each project are, I think will help us to identify some projects. Some patterns. When I look at goal number 7, I believe it is 4, 5, 6, goal number 7 for minimizing wildlife, impacts, collisions, nearly, looks like more than half of the projects on there scored 10. So, that's provide safer mode connected bicycle, goal number 7. So I think that there's a need to see how these different projects relate to the scoring criteria and one another in a single view. A stackable bar graph is what I would recommend be provided so that we can see how these projects weighted to get into that list of 32.
So let me, hold on a second, Josh. So I think you're onto something there, Carmine, and I think that what I'm sensing or hearing is this is part of the iterative process, right? I mean, this is all part of the conversations that we had started some time ago. A couple things rattle around in my head as I'm listening to the discussion. The first is, I think that, and I like your thought of maybe, and you didn't necessarily say it this way, but maybe each of those 32 projects plus these, right, are I'll use the term scored, for lack of a better term, to identify the value based on all the criteria that we established, the goals, all things go into that. That has already to some level been done, but I think we take another look at that. I think we take a look to see where the emphasis could be and where maybe there's some, and going back to Carmine's point, if there are some that are listed there that don't meet those goals directly, then they may be candidates for delaying or not doing as part of this. So that's the first thing. Second thing though, the clock's ticking, right? And what I'm wondering is, does it make sense for us, and hopefully Mary and Tom won't gouge their eyeballs out, does it make sense for us to recommend more time for this iterative process to be able to come to fruition? And what I'm thinking there is, we had talked about a joint CAC TMC conversation about some of this, and having that robust discussion in a way that ultimately could lead to a list of recommendations. And I'm starting to wonder, does it make sense for us to maybe take an extra 30 days or even an extra 60 days, have a couple of more conversations there, and develop that recommendation to the board? Just kind of thinking it through based on this, because I think the unknown on some of this, quite frankly, is we don't have costs. I mean, we have the updated costs from the jurisdictions, but you all haven't done your analysis, from a consultant standpoint. So that's going to bring another level of detail and I'll use the term accuracy, right? Which we could be having a discussion about projects that we're not even going to be able to afford based on the actual cost estimates that come through. So I'm just kind of thinking that through as maybe a conversation that instead of killing ourselves to meet the deadline, we have a conversation about the deadline just to provide us more opportunity. So Josh, you had a comment?
Yeah, and I guess I just wanted to, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, just wanted to kind of refresh the selection process to get that list of 32. The CAC members were asked to individually prioritize high, medium, low, the list of 108 projects. On average, we had 21.48 folks step through that exercise for each project and give which ones were their high, medium, low. We processed that into we gave 3 points for every time someone said it was a high priority, 2 points for medium priority, 1 point for low priority. We took that and tallied it up and then ranked it. And that's part of the information that's been shared. That was the driving, and then we looked at that list, that ranked list, and had a cutoff of 1.1 billion to kind of have that top CAC priorities. We then overlapped that with the TMC workshop priorities. And that gave us a list of 28 projects. And then we identified where we had some missing jurisdictions. So we added 4 additional projects. We added 2 additional projects for 2 additional jurisdictions that weren't in that initial overlap. Then we looked at the evaluation score. So the evaluation score really didn't come into play as in this initial cut. And it was always intended as a point of reference to see how well it aligns with some of the goals and objectives, but it wasn't used as selection criteria. It's more used as reporting out on how well the project list is performed.
Good, Jen.
You said it was an average 21.4 people scored. How many people are on the CAC?
Hockey.
Let me clarify that, and Mr. McGovern can chime in. We have, I would say, about 24, 25 active members. We currently have 30 on the roster.
Most of the active members participated.
And you didn't use the scoring to rank them? Is that what I just heard?
There are two sets of ranks. There are three sets of ranks, right? The TMC workshop, the CAC priorities, and then the evaluation score. And so those three apples, oranges, and bananas were used to inform the dialogue that Tom has kind of facilitated over the last two meetings on this.
Good, Terry.
So, and no offense intended in any way, shape, or form here, but that seems a little bit backwards to me. It seems that the goals and the scoring should drive the decisions. And if we take a group of people and say, what's your pet project? Which ones stand out to you as the most important to you? It's really going to depend on where they live and where they work and where they travel. It's not going to be dependent on the region. And, and that could very well be why we had a whole group of projects in one location and no place else. Because it wasn't scored based on those things. It was scored potentially. And I don't know, I'm surmising here how we ended up with so many in one location and not in other locations, and how there were very few projects that were included that were based on, the goals, the congestion and things of that nature. So, yeah, I don't know.
Any suggestions, Terry, on how we get to the promised land?
Well, I think, Carmine was hitting on it.
Mhm.
I think Carmine had a great idea and a great approach. And I think that gets us much further along in this process than, you saying, hey, Mike Ortega, what's your top 10 projects? I'm pretty sure one of them ain't going to be Cortero and I-10.
My grandkids live near there.
Okay, well, so, but I mean, it's going to kind of be based on what your interests are. And I don't know that that's really what helps the region. I think what Carmine described could potentially get us there, because it's based on the overarching guidelines and parameters for what we're supposed to be selecting these projects based upon.
It goes back to Jan's point that we've got other categories, or we've got other funding for some of the other
Things,
interests or priorities of the region.
Animal Crossing,
And-
yeah.
And Mr.
Discussion or transit. Go ahead.
One point in working through with the group that kind of focused on that exercise, one thing that we tried to hit home every single time, it felt like I was saying it every 20 minutes, is that whatever result of that evaluation tool is going to be, it is going to be a number that is going to be a point of reference that can be used to help inform the discussion. Ultimately, like I feel like we're going, with all due respect, I feel like we're going backwards a little bit in trying to align to a metric and a threshold against that metric, when really this is an initial list. This is initial platform for discussion where, adding some additional projects to the top may round out that list. In that dialogue, what took place in the workshop is kind of what needs to happen. What I feel is happened this week with CAC, and is nearing some potential resolution on what is a CAC list that the CAC is comfortable with, and in alignment with the TMC workshop priorities, to the degree that it is, or maybe a little outside of it. So I feel that evaluation score, well, believe me, I put plenty of energy into that, and I want to, and I feel, and I'm proud of it. I feel I'm professionally, I stand behind it, right? But I don't think that's the end all be all as it relates to the dialogue and discussion and the intent of the CAC that Tom and Mary have been helping navigate.
But I think your sense that we're taking a little bit of a step back is accurate. in that we want to make sure that whatever is ultimately, and I would even go as far as to say, because the resources are finite. If they weren't finite, then it wouldn't matter, right? We'll figure it out and there's plenty for everybody. But at some point, we probably don't even have enough money for the 32 projects. So if you think of it simplistically, what's the basis for reducing that list to say 30 projects? Just pick a number, right? And then we've got other pieces that are important here, right? And so I think some quantifiable approach, maybe the way that Carmine suggested, may be a good opportunity. Take a little bit of a step back to organize ourselves around that, because I do think that we aren't going to have enough money. It's my gut to do all of them, and we're almost arguing over the price of the wine before we grew the grapes. Like, go ahead, Janet and Carla.
Listen, this is both an art and a science. And I think that it's looking at how do we take the science piece, and I like Carmine's suggestion and how we stack it up. Obviously, the art piece is when we start figuring out, well, we need to make sure that there are things throughout the community, because in the final analysis, it is an election, right? And so we're going to have to look at those pieces as well. So I think if we were to take something like Carmine suggests, look at that parameters, let's look at the timeline, because I think it's fine. If Tom and Mary and others believe, if we could take that list or something that we're carving 108 down to a more manageable number, that might be 50, I don't know what it is, that looks at both what the TMC put forward, the CAC put forward. I'm willing to spend another day, if we could bring the two groups together and see if that gets us, to some conclusion. And I don't know where another 30 days, what that does to an overall timeline, but could it make it work? Because my fear now, frankly, is that what I don't want is the board to be trying to deconflict two very separate lists. And that's probably going to take more time than if we spend some time trying to get it together so that we as staffs can take to the board something that is much more integrated.
Thank you. Well said. Along those lines, my recommendation would be that if you look at the additional feedback that was provided last Monday by the CAC, I think those definitely warrant a response. Do we agree? Do we not agree? So we can take that back to the CAC at their next meeting. But between now and the next meeting, I would highly recommend potentially maybe just a couple of small groups getting together, and really a lot of this stuff can be resolved by probably coming back with a recommendation. Can we remove X, Y, and Z? Can we add A, B, C? And I think that would be a lot more productive and along the lines of what Carmine was saying. Yes, have that data, but that data hopefully with the smaller group, so we can actually really roll up our sleeves and look at it and then come back with a recommendation. In a large setting, like even at the CAC with 35 and even plus, I think that'll be a little bit more difficult unless we have this recommendation from a smaller group. So my recommendation would be, if you're all willing to do that, to select a smaller group from TMC to work with staff and come back with, here's what we did, here's what we looked at, along the lines of what Carmine just suggested, and then make recommendation to the full committee at that time.
Sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mike, to your point about bringing the TMC and CAC together, my concern with that would be so many people and so many opinions and so many thoughts, and trying to gain consensus from that many people, I think is going to be really difficult. So I kind of like Farhad's idea here of taking a select group that sits down and tries to kind of hammer through this and present something to the groups that say, hey, these are the things we considered based on the CAC additional discussions, based on our thoughts and conversation, and we bring forward something like that based again on some of what Carmine mentioned earlier.
What do you think, Tom and Mary, about that as an approach? And I see your hand up, Tom. And as you're thinking about it, maybe that small group is a small group of TMC and CAC members. Where there's some folks from the CAC and some folks from TMC that are designated to maybe sit around the table and try to, come up with a recommendation to both groups, basically. Go ahead, Tom, and then Shane, you're on deck.
Yeah, I think that's a worthy suggestion, and I think it's worth pursuing for sure. And logistically, obviously, quicker and easier to pull off, I think, at this point in our timeline. One quick thing I wanted to add about this question about scoring versus ranking as it was done. I was all over creating a tool that would make me a proud engineer of being able to select these projects with virtually no arguments or heartburn. And that was as dumb a thing as I could probably ever have come up with. But I want to mention that this tool that we developed to score projects, I think is good. I think, as Josh said, and rightly so, he should be proud of it. However, we didn't get as much participation in that ranking process from the CAC as we did, to the high, medium, and low ranking of all the projects. And I guess I've kind of changed my mind for sure that that was much more valuable to me in creating a ranked list than the scoring itself was. The scoring is a good secondary reference, if you will, for me anyway. And I think it's important to note that I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was less than half as many people on the CAC dug into that scoring deal. And besides, the scoring is 75% based just on metrics, just plain metrics. Nobody has to give an opinion about how many points it should get for congestion, as an example. It's all set up as metrics. Okay, sorry. That's
perfect. Good thoughts there, Tom. Go ahead, Shane.
Thank you. I'm just wondering what it would take to develop this tool, this graphic tool that that Carmine is referencing, given all the work that we have done. Because it seems to me like that would be a pretty good thing to have in our tool belt as this smaller group of representatives between the TMC and the CAC get together, to have that available to them to help guide their decision making makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm curious to know what it would take to really develop that kind of tool that Carmine referenced. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, I'll speak for Josh and our team. It sounds like it's relatively easy to do. It's just basically all this information is in a spreadsheet, so we can generate graphs easily. So along those lines, my recommendation would be obviously the three officers that have been engaged. They are liaisons to the TMC. I would recommend having the three officers from the CAC, obviously officers from TMC, and then Terry as the liaison. That'll be 6, and you can add as many as you like from there.
So I'm not gonna, we'll come back to that in a minute.
Okay.
In terms of chemistry, because
Yep.
I think maybe that's not the best way to do that. But so just how long will it take you to compile that information? Josh, you got any?
I was gonna show you.
Do it tomorrow. I'm just asking. So that we can-
Well, I was gonna show it to you right now. Yeah, but I didn't download the file. I'm sorry. Part of what the spreadsheet that is available. Let me go over here. In the first tab of project details, we have all of this information, and you can filter on potential list equals yes to see that list of 32, that initial list of 32, not including the recommended set that you saw this morning. in the CAC scores tab, you can see how we came about the CAC scores. And so for the top ranking CAC scores, you can, we emphasized it was a 0 to 10 for each goal area of the 10 goals. And where a project received 8, 9, or 10 points, it's a darker blue. So this is just visually, because there's a lot of information going on, right? This is a visual way of representing what goals kind of help influence the higher ranking, right? And so this is I'm sorry, I should have had this downloaded and ready to roll for you all. Okay, here it is. But we can pull this up and have, so this, instead of that bar chart, this was kind of an attempt to have that initial review. This will allow me to do this better with the potential list over here. Equals yes.
So while you're doing that, this is the kind of activity I'm proposing for the smaller group to actually sit down and drill really into the database.
See that anyway.
You can't see it, but this wouldn't, we'll have it on your laptop in front of you.
So this kind of helps demonstrate some of that information. So, so we have that, we have these values available at the project level. We have the CAC priorities and that ranking exercise, how many times it was identified as high, medium, or low, why that contributed to, and so we have all of this information and can present that out with that smaller working group.
I think you should present that to everybody if they haven't seen it already. I think.
We've done that with the CAC members. Obviously TMC has the information and be happy to do it again.
I think it's valued.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do it again. Really, the challenge, I think, with and Tom and I had this conversation. The challenge is that I think once we start getting into detailed numbers, then I think the focus kind of disappears a little bit. So I think Tom's done a good job of trying to bring it back to what does this all mean, and that's what we hope to do. But yes, it's definitely helpful for everybody to get in there and play with it on their own as well.
So my point is, I think we value in sharing it with the explanation in more detail. Because I think to share the spreadsheet is one thing, because you open it up, you're like, oh, that's really awesome. But I think to go over like you just did, some amount of detail to help guide, I think.
But we can do it right now if you like. Like I said, we did it with the CAC members, and I think it generated a lot of interest. So we're hoping everybody has access to the portal. Everybody's going in there. I hope.
Everybody has. So this spreadsheet is available under download ranking details, and so it opens to the README tab, in which the project details tab contains the results from tab 2, the CAC priorities and the scores. And that potential list, that initial potential list of 32. You want to filter on the CAC potential list equals yes, you can see those 32 projects. The CAC score rank displays the results of the evaluation tool exercise. So that's, these kind of green columns. This is the CAC score rank. This is the CAC priority rank. The tabs are a little bit backwards with the order of these columns, but this is the score. The data that went into that score is adjacent to it. That's why we wrong one.
As you're going through that, I think my point is you can maneuver through these and all these numbers back to your hand, right? I mean, you can rattle them all off. We don't do this full time.
Yeah,
so there's value in you articulating the thoughts that you just expressed here in a way that will help guide the conversation. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you where to find our budget on our website.
Sure.
I challenge you to find out where.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
there's all pieces, because I think that's the bottom line here, is trying to make it OPED and a conversation that can help inform. So, that's what I'm suggesting.
And I'm suggesting that this is the opportunity to do it. If you like, we can dive in. If anybody's interested, we can dive in right now.
I don't know that we are, we could, the group wants to, but I don't know that we're prepared to do that today. I think that conversation is really one of, okay, what does this look like going forward? And how do we organize ourselves around the conversations we've had? That's my comment. Go ahead, Carmine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And really, I think seeing these visually represented in a graph is going to be helpful for everyone. And so just to clarify, what I was asking for is all 108 projects shown in a bar graph, and that the bar graph break down the different quantity goal scores for each of those projects. And then if you put in there a line that shows relative to each project, what was its CAC priority rank, I think you're gonna see that there's some gaps between how the quantifiable and the quantitative, right? Those two things I think are at a disconnect somewhere along the way. Again, so when I just looked at Thornydale Road, which the CAC is now saying, hey, consider adding in. So out of the 10 criteria, 5 of them scored 9 or 10. So at half of them, 50% of the goals scoring was a 9 or a 10. It was ranked based on that scoring 5 overall, but it didn't make it into the original list of 32. So that's what I'm hoping to see, is where we have seemingly a disconnect between those two things. And really a graph, as Josh said, all the data is here. Just portraying it in a graph, I think, will give us all a quick visual representation. I don't think we need to do that today, but having that prior to going into any subsequent discussions on this is going to be really helpful.
So I would also take it a step further in that not focusing, at least initially, on the disconnect, but focusing on those that align. Those that align, we just take them off the table and we know that they're recommended, they're in the mix. And then the conversation becomes those that are on the disconnect. Because if, and I don't know what the percentage would be, but let's say that half of them align both CAC and TMC, then at least we're done with those, set those off to the side, put them on the shelf, and then focus on those where there may not be.
Well, we did look at those numbers as we were presenting these results, and so there were 28 that came out of the TMC workshop as TMC priorities that are in that initial list. So, and then similar to how we ranked the CAC priorities and identified kind of the top priorities, was looking at that $1.1 billion threshold. We went down the ranked list till we hit that 1.1 billion. Similarly, we did that with the CAC scores over here. And when we looked at that overlap with the list of initial 32, I believe that was at like 25 of those were in that top CAC score priority. Here they are right here. I can give you that number. Does that make sense? So considering that overlap, we have that, and okay, it was 20 of them. 20 of the 32 were in that top ranked CAC score list, along with this list of 32.
So 20 of the 32,
Correct.
that means that we're looking at 12
Right, and so and then
potentially. That
well, yeah. Plus, if some of these others are added in, honestly, some of the others that are suggested here, as Carmine pointed out, are better performing on the performance end. And so this is an initial list to kind of get the discussion and dialogue going. this is also, to Jan's point, the art and the science of it, and getting the CAC's qualitative perspective to a certain degree, is what I trying to walk that fine line and get that balance. So we have this information, so we can turn that around for your review, with the stack bar chart. May want to have some dialogue in between to make sure we're getting it right.
Go ahead, Carmine. Thanks, Josh.
Sorry, hit the wrong button. So on Thornydale, just looking at that spreadsheet off to the side, or Josh, if maybe you can unfilter that and get us back to Thornydale.
Yep.
So Thornydale was the county's #2 priority. It was also part of the TMC ranked priority. And then when you look at the CAC scoring evaluation, it was #5, but it was not a CAC priority on the qualitative, and therefore it didn't make the list. So it hit the marks on TMC, on the CAC quantitative evaluation, but it did not make it in terms of the qualitative CAC, and therefore the project that is the county's overall #2, the CAC's qualitative ranked #5 project, did not make it into the list of 32. So that's where I think we need to look at these details and then figure out how do we get our way to bringing the best and highest priority projects forward.
That's a great example there, Carmine. Just out of curiosity, Tom, maybe you can help us with that. The TMC priority, quantitatively a CAC priority based on the scoring, but didn't make the list. Maybe you can help us with that a little bit.
Yeah, I think Carmine's right. There are some clear and some not so clear discrepancies, between the two ranking exercises. And that's why Josh, has been saying these are kind of snapshots, if you will, of data that we try to put all together. And this process of looking at where some of those holes are, like Thornydale, I think is right where we're at this point. And I think it's the perfect spot for that small group to focus.
Good for us.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, I want to give the CAC credit because they recognized that was the art of it. And at the last meeting, they recognized that. And going back to what Terry said earlier, I think that's part of the process that maybe they were focusing too much in certain areas, and then they recognized that, oh, Thornydale is a priority. So I just want to give them credit for that because they're going through that exercise.
So there was a suggestion by Farhad that the chairs maybe get together with a couple other folks. I disagree with that in that I'm not sure that it should be the chairs necessarily from this perspective. I think it's whoever wants to help and be a part of it should be the group. And if people are interested, if you don't want to do it, then certainly do that. That's on the TMC. So that's my suggestion, is really a call for who wants to be involved or engaged in this. Number one. Number two, Tom, it's kind of your call on the CAC. My gut would be that you haven't had this conversation with your group, and it might be something you want to have a conversation with them before we just unilaterally make a call to say, hey, that's what we're doing. I think that the smaller group idea is a good one, as long as it's both CAC and TMC working together. The chemistry of that, I would open it up to those that want to participate. It's my opinion.
I'd agree with that. And I think we can even now send an email to people and ask who'd be interested. I think we ought to try to set a cap on the size of it, though, both for quorum is, concerns, but maybe more just for functionality. And, from my perspective, I would, assuming that I got a fairly, robust list of people who are interested, want to try to get folks from various, already established mindsets, so that we could have kind of that full discussion, so people don't feel railroaded on either side. As far as, well, all the congestion guys have gotten in here and look what they've come back with, or all the bicycle people or the wildlife people have all gotten together, and that would be kind of my thinking in putting my part of the group together.
Okay, great. Shane, and then Terry, and then Parad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The TMC really isn't that big of a group to begin with. And you think about the membership of the TMC, it truly is a regional perspective. And so I guess, I need to hear a pretty convincing argument not to have a representative from each agency a part of that discussion, and then make sure that whoever is coming in from the CAC perspective also, has that same type of regionalistic perspective. And so I guess I would just put that on the table for consideration. Thanks. I don't think that's too big of a group if we have the TMC, which represents the region, I think, very well, and an equal number of CAC representatives at the table that have also been selected because they too represent either geographically or in their perspective the region. That would be fine with me. Thanks.
Thanks, Shane. Appreciate it. Terry, and then Paul.
Well, actually, I think Shane and Tom covered it pretty well.
Yeah.
It's kind of my perspective as well, as I think the TMC as a whole, each jurisdiction should be represented at this. And I kind of like Shane's perspective of an equal number from the CAC. Too many from the CAC, and I don't think we'll get much accomplished. So, diversity of thought, diversity of geographic location, whatever Tom and his board feel is appropriate to appoint and identify for their group. So it's a group of maybe 14,
10 or 10, 12,
10, 12 people.
Some in that ballpark.
Yeah,
Sure.
10, 12 people.
Good.
I think that's what first.
Parad.
So just to summarize, so it'll be a TMC meeting with invited guests from CAC in addition to the 3 officers. Is that what you're suggesting?
I would say that includes the how many board members are there
I'm sorry, on the TMC?
on the CAC?
CAC, we have 30 members.
No, but how many
3
members of
officers.
your 3
Three
officers?
So my recommendation, if I may suggest, that it would be another TMC meeting. This way all TMC members are present, but only at 3 officers. Again, because it starts getting really big. As it is, TMC is about 20 members.
And I guess what I heard was TMC being sort of representative of the TMC, one from each of the incorporated jurisdictions and from the county, and
Most of the jurisdictional
yeah,
members.
just one from each
jurisdictional members.
Okay,
jurisdiction.
so that's 9,
Right.
9.
Does that work?
and then the 3 officers from CAC, that's 12.
And then-
I'm pushing back on the 3 officers from CSC. I'll leave that to you, Tom and Mary, but I think there would be more value in having the geographic, the diversity of thought from the CAC as well.
Yeah.
Just as many members as they think necessary or value to bring to the conversation.
So you're saying we have 9 jurisdictions?
9 jurisdictions plus the 3 officers, that's 12, and then as many as you like.
Okay, so how many jurisdictions are here today? 5. Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
4,
We
5,
count-
6, you got 2 on the
We count
phone.
you, Rod, sorry.
Thank
6.
you.
No, you got 2 on the phone. You got Oro Valley and Sahuarita on the phone.
I guess so let's just kind of take a little bit step back. I think the point of the TFC, the more a broader cross-section of TMC members than just the officers is a good idea. That was my point early on. I would suggest the same for the CAC as well. And we manage our way through it. I mean, I don't know that we just set an artificial cap. We just manage our way through it. The only hesitation I would have in making it a TMC meeting, I don't think that the TMC should control the conversation. I think it needs to be a workshop with CAC members, you know, on equal footing, where Tom is there as the chair of the CAC, maybe not in an official capacity, but more just as a partner, if you will. Again, I'm thinking about the formality of saying it's a TMC meeting with a few CAC members sprinkled in. I think that's not a good message as much. But again, Tom, I'll leave it up to you all. Or we can leave it up to you all to try to figure out how to best organize yourselves to participate. Go ahead. Hey, Tom, before I come to you, go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily disagree with you, Mike, in the fact that I think it can be more than just the 3 officers from the CAC. I would just be cautious about adding too many people. I mean, if we get 20, 25 people in a room, we're all trying to come to some sort of consensus, it's going to be difficult. Having sat in the CAC meetings, or at least listening to the CAC meetings, those meetings can go on pretty long, and it's not a matter of gaining consensus in a quick fashion. So if we're going to try and do this in one meeting, if we're going to do it over 10, 15 meetings, I'd say we could probably get there. You can do as many as you want, but Tom knows his group, you know, and Mary, you guys know the group better certainly than I do. So I would say that you guys maybe come up with a reasonable number, and I don't know what that number is either. So.
Mr. Chairman, the way I would look at it really is as a TMC meeting in my view, and I would be asking the CAC members who are interested in helping the TMC come to conclusion about some of those questions that you had in front of you, and in that respect, then you know the CAC is supporting TMC and providing input as we try to get that input from TMC back to the CAC to create this list that we're responsible for. So maybe it's just semantics, but and I would see, you know, no more than probably 6 or so from the CAC. I see that Carolyn has her hand up. She probably has an idea about it as well.
Go ahead, Carolyn, and then Shane, you're on deck.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I agree with Tom, and thanks for this discussion about having some members there. And I like I said, I agree it's more than the 3 chairs. There's a lot of, I think as Terry said at the beginning of the meeting, we had a very productive meeting last time, and we're starting to really come to some consensus on a lot of things. But the one thing I wanted to add is what has come up a few times from members, and this goes back to Carmine's questions about Thornydale, et cetera, is that members would like to know more about some of, well, all of these projects, the details of the problems and the details. And so when we have a discussion with members of the CAC at your meeting, of course, you all would be prepared to kind of justify a project by going into more details of it, because from a spreadsheet and from the, you know, from a citizen's perspective with limited knowledge of a lot of these projects, we are struggling a little bit. You know, one of the things that came up again yesterday is what exactly is Modernize again? And, you know, going into those projects on an individual basis, at least some of them that we have questions about, or that a jurisdiction like the county would want to push, please come and justify, because we couldn't really do it in this spreadsheet fashion with limited information. So I just wanted to add that. I think this is going in a real positive way, and I think we can get a lot done with participation with some of the CAC members, 6 or so, like Tom said, and all of the jurisdictions. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Carolyn. I appreciate that. Jane, you're up. Chris, you're on deck.
Thank you, Mike. The thought that I had was, I wonder if this is the type of meeting that would best be supported through facilitation rather than have, PAG staff do this. I wonder if having a facilitator in there would be helpful. I just know the power of that kind of facilitation, and it just sometimes it's helpful. And I don't know if that's where we're at or not as we jump into the more granular details of this, but I wanted to put that on the table for consideration. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll come back to that in a minute. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had sent some questions, so I've really just been listening to Pocky. Sorry, we had sent some questions to Pocky previously, and I think some of those were addressed along the same lines of what are the categorical definitions and rankings, and how are they defined and on the projects. And before both groups start going down different roads, pun intended, I think this is a good approach and having the jurisdictions, and I would support that. I would agree with kind of the latter consensus of keeping it as on the smaller makeup as possible, just in terms of time. But that was a question that maybe I missed that you posed. In what is the timeline, and how quickly do we need to get this done? Is it just one meeting? Is it 2? Because if we're going to be, my only concern is really culling down that list and then diving into the details of all the remaining projects, how they got ranked, the massive spreadsheets and all that. I just I think that'd be helpful for the group to understand, and what is the timeline we're looking at. And then I think from our standpoint, I think we're really close to progress and getting there. I think we just need better understanding, and having both representatives from the CAC and the TMC in the same room together would be helpful. I would be a little concerned on the TMC leading that effort, or having it solely or mainly as a TMC meeting with CAC support. In terms of that perception from the community, I wouldn't want it to seem like, jurisdictional staff are leading the effort in dictating which projects then go out to the community. And so I would just ask that workshop, study session, whatever it is, just be a little bit more on that collaborative side. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Farhad, you had a hand up?
So logistics, obviously, and I'm sure you all appreciate that. So we need to make a decision which group is leading. The agenda for that group obviously has to be a public meeting. Make sure that we recognize the quorum of that group will be in attendance. If we do not have a quorum of the CAC, that's okay, but that still needs to be on the agenda. So I don't want to bore you with the logistics of it, but my recommendation still is to make sure that there is one group that is leading. They have a public meeting, and then the other group is invited to attend so we can formalize the agenda.
So a suggestion from Shane to maybe have a facilitator. I think that's fine. Have no issue with that at all. Thoughts on that? Do you have anybody in mind, Shane?
If I may go back to Chris's question before we get into that topic. So Chris, thanks for asking the question, because that is important. Our target is to have at the next January meeting of the board to have a short list. Obviously, it is a linear process. We want to get a short list in front of the board. So January 26th is our target. Anything we do would have to happen between now and then.
Yeah, and as I started the conversation, there might be an opportunity to say, we're going to pause it for a bit and let them know now that we're going to go through this process. I'm just nervous about shoehorning this into a conversation I mean, there's value and efficiency and saying there's a deadline, because then it doesn't go to 10 meetings, as Terry outlined. But I'm just a little nervous about that timing. If you think we can pull it off, we don't have to make that call today. You know, we can try to meet second week of or third week of January before board meets, and hopefully we've got something that we can report to them. But I would be a little nervous about, you know, that deadline, because that's really the deadline that we can have a conversation. Yeah, I don't think it hurts anything to get some. But Josh,
I just wanted to kind of remind everyone that the list of 32, they are all TMC workshop priorities. So out of that workshop, there were 64 projects that were identified as priorities. So this list of 32 is a subset of what everybody felt good about that day. So just to kind of reiterate that point.
so I think that, yes, I hear you and I appreciate that. I think the concern is those 32, as Carmine has reminded us on Thornydale,
right,
may not be the priority for the regional partners or jurisdictional partners. And so we should have a conversation.
Perfect. Yeah, and the list of the additional projects from the actual real discussion on it from this week that took place, because the first presentation of it was orientation on all the numbers. And then this last week that resulted in this handout today, the top portion of the handout today, that came out of the dialogue after ingesting this content. So
Where are you with the schedule, Farhad, to get costs, not from the partners, because I know those are coming.
Yes.
But to get the consultants on board to.
Sure. Thank you for that. We do have a consultant on board for as needed. We are starting to work with them to get them organized and ready to go. But as I said before, ideally, we want to have a short list that at least everybody around the table says, yes, this is the list before we put them to work, because obviously that's going to be a lot of effort for them. Obviously the cost. So we want to make sure that the list we provide to them is nearly complete. So they're not doing 108 projects, they're doing 35, whatever the number might be. So we hope that they can mobilize and get going, hopefully as early as March. That's our target deadline to get them the list. Obviously, if we have a list sooner than that, we'll get it to them sooner.
So I'll say again, I think that we should start them sooner rather than later.
Once we have a list, yes.
But we know based on the list that Josh showed, there's some that are both priorities on CAC and TMC. It seems they can start on those. My nervousness is we're going to have all this conversation, and we're not going to have those numbers go out of sight in terms of the magnitude. We're not going to have enough to do even the 32 or however many more we add. And that's my nervousness on it. Without, I think waiting to the end is potentially not the best.
So if I may, based on the most recent updates we got, I think I won't speak for our jurisdictional partners, but I think everybody felt that they were being conservative enough with their numbers that at least we're getting the feeling that they're comfortable with what they presented to us recently. So I think we're in a good place. Again, crossing the T's, dotting the I's on the final list. And then even the final list, I would say, is not final, because then we have to take another look at it and add and subtract at that point.
On the record, because I think we're going to be really tight on time. All right, so when's our next scheduled TMC meeting?
Second Wednesday of every month. It's January 11th at 9 o'clock.
Is there value in trying to make that the joint meeting of the CAC, this next round of discussion?
I personally like that.
Okay, any disagreement with that? We may want to think about starting just a skosh earlier that day, maybe 8:30. We won't do it 7:30.
Thought you were going to say 7.
Yeah.
I'd be okay with it. Dan, I guess
I was going to say, actually, I like it.
So ideally, it's already on your schedule, but I would suggest allow additional time just in case.
Yeah, so I'm gonna suggest we start even 8 or 8:30. What do y'all think about the time?
Either one's fine.
Shane's saying yes.
Jane, you got any?
Everybody's got a thumbs up?
There?
Yep. good.
Mary, Tom, everybody else?
Chris is good. Mary's good.
You want to
Tom's
try
good.
and do it at 8, Rod?
I would like to say that, when we enter the next thing in my topic, we might be adding some scope to that meeting a little bit, so.
Okay,
Why not?
should we shoot for 8 then? 8 o'clock that morning as opposed to 8:30?
So just,
Gives us time.
just to complicate the conversation, we have the management committee meeting typically that day as well. So it'll be management first, then TMC. 8:30.
Yeah, I think Mike said he wants to start at 7:30 TMC.
Works for me.
How about 6 a.m.?
Doesn't bother me.
I don't know if
Maybe
it's-
Yeah,
4:40
thank
in
you,
the morning. Is there a need for us to have the management committee meeting that day?
We do have items that obviously are going forward to the regional council. Yes, we do have to
Why don't we
have.
do this then? Why don't we start, why don't you advertise it as the management meeting is at 8?
It's usually half an hour meeting.
I understand. Advertise it at 8 and then the TMC at 8:15 or after.
That's
So if we get through the management meeting quickly,
Right.
then we can move right into Teams, because otherwise if we just have to sit and wait for 10 or 15
yeah,
minutes. we'll waste
typically we
time.
allow half an hour. We can
So
allow 15
Why
minutes.
don't we do that? If everybody's okay with that, we'll notice the TMC meeting at 8:15 or after, and the management will start at 8 o'clock. Tom, does that give you and Carol and Mary, does that give you all enough time to organize yourselves around the getting some TMC members to participate?
Yeah, I think so. I'll mention to you though that our meetings on the first and third Mondays of the month are both being pushed back a week. Both the meetings in January because of federal holidays. So we're actually meeting on the 9th, so a couple days before you. And so we may have some fresh questions, I guess, as well, that may fit into your meeting on the 11th, but otherwise sounds doable to me.
Hey, Tom, do you need more time? Would it help you if we delayed our meeting for a week? Is there any value in that?
I don't know. Probably not. It just depends what comes out of our meeting. If there's, a bunch of work for staff to put together some report or, further changes in the priority list, it may not give them time to react so that you could see it. So I don't know, maybe I'd defer to Pocky and Farhad about what they think about that, but it would be okay with me either way.
Any thoughts on that, Farhad or Pocky?
No, I would rather stick to January 11th. We do have a lot of work before we get to the board, so that gives us additional time prior to the board meeting.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we had the CAC meeting 2 days ago and we were able to turn over the information 2 days later, so I don't see a problem with that.
Okay, so let's stay with the 11th. Now, Tom, if after the CAC meeting, which I assume is that Monday, you see a need for us to change our meeting to accommodate any aspect of that, then let us know and then we'll react to that. But at this point, let's just assume it's going to be the 11th at the times that we outlined. That should work.
Sounds good.
My gut is because we're going to try to do it as a workshop. My gut is that it would be probably the only thing on the agenda. Is there anything else on the agenda that we would need for the RTA?
Yeah, for the TMC meeting, I agree with you. We want to just focus on this topic. And as I said, I would allow more than 3 hours if that's possible.
Now, you could, or we could leave the items that we've traditionally had on the agenda as outlined. That way we've got a little bit of cover in case we need to talk about CAC or remaining RTA projects. We could do that without getting ourselves into any trouble. So that way we're not hamstrung on just one piece. That's another option we could do. Okay, so that's where we'll head then. TMC meeting on the 11th at the times we outlined, and then we'll go from there. So now, Rod, you've been really patient. You want to go to the second part of that agenda?
All right.
That would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of the topics the topic I wanted to bring up today was something I kind of broached at our last meeting, which is I think we really have to look at the ADOT projects through kind of a different lens than the other projects. And the main logic of that is the funding available for the ADOT projects. The ones that have been moved forward on the list of 32 from the CAC, I think the CAC seems to be under the impression that they're going to be funding 100% of those projects. And I'm not sure if that's a realistic expectation, considering ADOT has designated funding specifically allocated for the PAG region. How much of that funding do we want to put in there versus how much of that funding do we want to use per project to leverage that federal funding in certain timeframes to get that project completed without having to allocate the entire project funding. So with that, without having to allocate the entire project funding, we can spread that load, whatever load the RTA and the board decides, we can spread that load across many more projects for various reasons. One, of course, being leveraging of that funding to make sure and to ensure that the projects are not moved out by later boards and moved or not constructed by later boards. Leveraging in the sense of combining it with local funding to perhaps a specific project also might have or be in the realm of a development agreement where there's local funding available for those projects through the community or through the jurisdiction that can be brought to the table. We can then use the RTA funding and the combination of that local funding and then the additional state funding to leverage a whole complete project without using all of the RTA funds. And then there's the component of the desires of a community. Our ADOT has several design concept reports out there that were done with the requirements of ADOT. And at the time, we got input from the community. Those inputs might have changed over time. The community might want other things now. It's just not in the design concept report, which would possibly require additional funding, which could be taken in up by the RTA. But we got to take advantage of that now instead of 15 years down the road when we finally realize that that's the case. So with that, I don't think those people are viewing the ADOT projects through that type of a lens. They're viewing it in the same way they're viewing all the other projects that are put in there. And how does this project meet this criteria? And it's going to get all the funding. And I'm not confident that that's a reasonable approach. So what I'm putting forward here and asking, I guess, is some kind of a framework for decision making on how to move forward with the inclusion of the ADOT projects in a regional perspective. And how would we do that? I can talk about project by project if you like. I brought several PDFs of various projects so that you can zoom in and look at each individual location if you so desire. I have a list of various ones that I see that might be issues. So I'm going to put it out for discussion at this point and see what you folks think.
So Rod, when you say ADOT projects, you're talking only about those that you have identified, not necessarily other interchanges that have been put forward for potential improvements, but just those that you ADOT have identified.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I'm talking about projects that are on the ADOT facilities. That's what I'm talking about, because that's the money that ADOT can spend its federal resources on per year, we get a certain amount of money that has to be spent in the PAG region, and that's what we budget from. And that's what I mean by leveraging that federal funds. It could be spent entirely. What we've put forth is projects that we, as the operator of the system, deem as a necessity, and what we think needs to be done moving forward. What I think the confusion is, our expectation is not to have those 100% funded. We were looking for a regional perspective on what the region thinks the needs are and how we should allocate that funding, which is completely different than the process that's used for the other projects that we're putting forth in the RTA.
I think that that's an important distinction, because I've always been confused about the fact that ADOT has a list of projects, and those projects are in the city of Tucson boundaries, some of them perhaps in county boundaries outside of city boundaries, and then some of them are in Marana's jurisdiction, right? But the ones that are in Marana's jurisdictions aren't on your list. And the ones that are on your list that are in the city of Tucson aren't on the city of Tucson's list. So I'm just kind of curious about why the disconnect between the various projects they're all ADOT facilities, but they're not priorities for the jurisdictions, but they are priorities for you. And the ones that are priorities for the jurisdiction, meaning Marana, is not a priority for you. So I've always been a little bit confused about that.
So I can give you some more granular details
Okay.
on that if you'd like. So if you look at it from ADOT's perspective, the south section of I-10 from I-19, I guess it's the east section of I-10 from I-19 east. That's the oldest section of I-10. It is lacking in capacity, it's lacking in safety, it's got many, many issues that are all delegated and designated in the DCR, which cause us a great deal of operational issues, both in terms of safety, traveling safety, capacity, all of those things on our system. If you look at some of the projects up on the northwest side of town, from ADOT's perspective, the interstate is functioning fine. So if there's backups at, for example, Cortero, they're cross street backups, trouble getting across the intersection underneath and such. There's a significant amount of storage capacity on the ramps. There's a significant amount of capacity on the main line. So we don't have the impacts to our system. That's not saying there's no impacts, but the impacts are more of a local traffic regional component. We'll certainly be happy to participate if the region decides that that's a project they want to move forward. But if you're asking ADOT, what are their perspectives and what are their needs and what do they see as the biggest issues on their system? It's going to be that southeast part of town on I-10.
One of the pieces that I think is important, and Terry, you kind of hit it, and Rod and I had a conversation about some of this. I think it's important to not differentiate improvements that are of value to the region, particularly in the crossroads, right? Because those improvements, although mainline in some instances, can't differentiate, an interchange mainline value to, I mean, you could, I guess, but it sort of value. One of the things that we were chatting about is if you think of it in a way where we're bringing all of the regional dollars to the conversation at once versus here's the RTA next pot, and then here's the regional allocation pot, the PAG sprinkles out on an annual basis. That makes a lot more sense to then see where those come together. Because I think the point, when we were chatting, it hit me like a ton of bricks. All we're really looking at is where, and I use the term local match, right? But that isn't necessarily accurate because they're not necessarily grant. I mean, unless we got grant money, then that would be it. But I was kind of thinking of it in terms of what percentage makes sense to spread those regional monies even farther. So for example, if we're going to do an interchange, and we're working on interchanges now, an interchange that is extremely important from a congestion standpoint,
both on the main line and on the cross street, what regional value is there. And so is that regional, so that sprinkling of local cash, and let's say it's 10% or 15%, or just pick a number. And then the rest of those dollars are regional dollars. Then that's a conversation. What makes this really interesting, fascinating is it's almost the same board, you know, the PAG, you know, the board that's making that call in terms of how those work and the chemistry of that. So I think the discussion is clarity on that and looking at the RTA next conversation, holistic manner with regional dollars as well as potential RTA dollars to help inform what that plan looks like. And one can't happen without the other. So if there's an expectation of regional dollars coming to a project, for whatever reason, the PAG distribution of that doesn't fit that, then we're in trouble. If we make an assumption about RTA next dollars coming into the regional conversation, and that doesn't happen, then that plan doesn't work. So they have to go together. And so I was really pleased with Rod's thinking on a broader level. Good, Bart.
Just a point of clarification. The portion of dollars that are on the ADOT facility, they are allocated to the region, but they're separate from what comes through the PAG process. They're state allocated federal dollars that come to ADOT, correct? I want to make sure you clarify the difference between what comes to PAG and what comes through ADOT's process.
Yeah, so there's two sources of funding. There's, and maybe I'm just using the wrong terminology. There is a PAG funding that PAG allocates for the entire region, not only ADOT facilities. However, there is also a larger, when I don't know the values, I shouldn't say larger, another pot of funding that is strictly delegated for the PAG region to be used strictly on ADOT facilities to be programmed by the PAG board.
So there's a difference between those. I want to make sure everybody's
But
clear on that.
you know, there was also a misconception, I think, out there that ADOT designates what projects do it through the state board. And that's just not the way the system works. The PAG region and the PAG board programs the funding for the ADOT projects. The state board accepts that program and inserts it into their statewide program.
But to put it in perspective of the current RTA plan back in 2006, RTA board recommended utilizing some of these future federal and state dollars on, and then you have a handout on it, on some of these ADOT projects. And then RTA provided the additional local funds for those projects.
And one of the ones we're finishing up on that is Houghton. And that's a good example that Mike was talking about. I think at the time when that was put in there, the original plan for Houghton was, I believe, 50 million. There's about $9.8 million of RTA funds in Houghton. So that's about 20%. So give or take.
I guess my point is it has to be factored into the conversation. And then beyond that is what other federal dollars or even other regional dollars could be conjured into the discussion for the region. And that's all I'm suggesting. And I think we might be using different language, but I'm clear in the different pots. All I'm saying is from a regional planning perspective, and particularly for RTA Next, it's important to recognize that component of it. And I think initially when those ADOT projects were listed, there may have been confusion or thought that the expectation was all of that money would need to come out of RTA Next. Correct. And that was not the intent, nor was it the case, or is not the case. I think that's probably the confusion is like, and I think even some TMC members, some of my former TMC members said, you know, why are ADOT projects on this list? They're not necessarily regional projects. Well, the projects themselves may not be, but the local match is a component of that. I think that may have been some confusion.
Mm-hmm. So again, how do we develop that process and to come up with some kind of for lack of a better word, financial arrangements of what money goes where to get the desires of the region most effectively on the ADOT system.
And I think that's a component of the development of RTA Next, is my opinion. And
Agreed.
so how we incorporate that and maybe educate folks on how to incorporate that is pretty important.
Mhm.
So where do we go from here? Rob?
That's what I'm putting it out.
He's looking, I'm looking around.
So if I may, again, I think it's important. So on the list of 32, there are only 5 projects that are on that list. So obviously you want to kind of put that in context. Out of those 5 projects, how much of it potentially could be federal or state dollars? How much of it could be RTA dollars?
So I think we may want to back up, because if those 5 projects were put under there, under the framework of having to fund the entire project, was that the proper framework to make those decisions?
Exactly.
You know, oh, I'm sorry, Tom, I didn't see your.
I don't believe, I'm sorry, just.
So if those 5 projects that were put on the list of 32, those 5 ADOT projects, if the decision process and the input was that those were going to be 100% funded by RTA, was that the proper decision process to include those? Because you didn't look at any other ones.
Yeah, I believe 3 of them had ADOT dollars on them, right? Josh, I'm looking at you. The State Route 210, those 3 had ADOT dollars.
Right, they had ADOT dollars on it. But if the expectation was that the RTA was going to fund 100% of those 3 projects, okay? What if the reality is that we'll just pull a number out of the sky, they were only going to fund 20% of each of those projects? That makes us a significant amount of money available for other options to spend only a proportion of those projects, on those projects. So there's a lot of opportunity here that I think was missed in that decision-making process.
And I will tell you from the original discussions, there was an expectation that RTA Next was going to fund a big chunk of those projects. I remember the conversation around this table when we had that discussion, which, you know, got some folks riled up. So I think the key then is those 5 projects, what is the dollar amount? What's the total cost? And what's the expectation for RTA Next? Then that can be a recommendation or conversation about, you know, where that falls into the priority list of projects. And I don't have it committed to memory. Tom, you have your hand up. Thanks.
Yeah, the argument comes back, and I think, Mike, you mentioned a minute ago about some TMC members that were asking, why are there any ADOT projects on here at all? And you get some of that same conversation from a few people on the CAC. But the problem with ranking those projects or seeing them in a different light, and I completely agree with what Rod said about the framework, you know, perhaps changing the priorities. You know, we're going to be asked as a CAC to recommend these projects at a total amount of, you know, let's say it was 80% non-RTA funding, but none of that exists right now. And, you know, I think that's the rub. That's where people are having trouble with programming projects that can't be programmed because the money's not guaranteed, or it's not, you know, even on somebody else's program at this point.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I have to leave.
To here shortly. So here's my gut. I think, Rod, you brought up a great point. My suggestion would be to dissect those 5 projects to see what the cost estimate is on it, and then what the chemistry of that is in terms of expectations for RTA funding in the future. Pick a number, and then we mull that over and make sure that that number is adequately built into to the program.
So I have a couple of questions regarding that. If we do that, and we ADOT picks a number, that's going to make available more funds. It's also going to change the dynamic of the discussion. So I'm going to pick a city project. The Drexel corridor is coming up. There's a project out there in ADOT's line with a completed design concept report to put a traffic interchange at Drexel Road. We didn't move that forward as a project. It will eventually get done. If there is an opportunity to leverage federal funds in through RTA Next to put that project out there in maybe the third quarter, somewhere that might fit with the city's project out there, and then with our timing as well, so that we can combine some things together to get an economy of scale and increase opportunities for them. Without having that project is not included in those five. So how would we open that up for that discussion again?
Well, simplistically, I think, and it's not just about Drexel, but any of the projects that are out there, the worst case scenario, in my opinion, is we put Drexel Road in the RTA Next plan. So voters sees that, people get excited about that, but there's an expectation we're going to get some external funding source that isn't sure. Now, if you can project out that within a 20-year period, it will get done, we'll include it. But I'm nervous about us putting projects on where we have an expectation or a hope that we're going to get some future federal or some other outside dollars. That's just being real simplistic about it, right? And now if there's expectation we get it done, then gold, we're golden, then we move forward.
That is an extremely valid point. And I completely agree with you. And I think we can talk to PAG and have PAG look at the projected funding. And I think it would be reasonable for PAG and this group and the board to say, we can designate 50% of that projected funding in RTA Next will be available, or some value of that, so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where we've leveraged federal funding so much where we then don't have enough federal funding available in the outer years to cover that. And we end up with a problem with the voters. I agree with that. That's going to have to be part of the discussion.
I know we're going to lose our quorum potentially here pretty quick. Why don't we do this, Rod, maybe between now and the 11th? Let's bring that discussion back and we'll start there on the 11th to hopefully bring some thoughts and specificity to what that could look like going forward. That would be my suggestion. I'm gonna move us along here. Thank you, Jen. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any additional conversation on the completion remaining projects, Rod?
Not at this time. As you recall, the board had recommended moving forward projects, and then we're in a really good shape. So hopefully at the next meeting, we can discuss it further with our annual update. To the public is coming up. We're going to have that report out to the public. And then at the next meeting, we can discuss it further.
Future agenda items. Anybody have any future agenda? I think we've got a game plan for the 11th.
Yep.
I wanted to go back to CAC. So John Bernal had sent a note suggesting he step down as the rep for TMC, or the liaison TMC. So since Jan left, I would suggest that Jan be the. So Gary, if you don't mind, hang on to that for at least till the next meeting, and then we'll chat and get someone to help out in more official role, I guess. If I can make it on the 9th, I will certainly listen in and be there as well. Okay. If you don't mind, just send there. All right, cool. Anything else for the good of the order? What? It's even better. So since we lost our quorum, we stand adjourned. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
That's how things